You ever did that feeling where, like, you can understand so much English, but when you try to speak, it's like, I don't know, trying to solve one of those Rubik's Cubes, but you can't even see it.
Yeah.
Totally. And we are diving deep into all those YouTube transcripts that you guys sent in about speaking English.
Hmm.
I think we are going to find some really interesting stuff here.
For sure.
Yeah.
It really is. It's like you have all these ingredients for like an amazing meal, right?
Yeah,
But you have no idea how to cook it.
that's so true.
And it's something that almost every English learner feels.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're talking about today.
Exactly.
So we are going to explore like the science behind why speaking feels like such a different skill than understanding.
Yes.
We're going to like take down some of those mental barriers that I think we all face and really equip you guys with some practical techniques to like actually get those words flowing.
Because a lot of people think that if you just listen to enough English or if you read enough English, that somehow you'll just magically be able to speak it.
Right.
But our brains don't actually work that way.
Okay, so let's get into this brain stuff because I've heard about this Broca's area thing.
Yes.
But to be honest, it just sounds really technical.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
kind of break that down for us?
Yeah. So basically, Broca's area is like the speech production center of your brain.
Okay.
It's the part that's responsible for planning and coordinating the movements that you need to produce spoken language.
Okay.
And just like any other skill, it needs targeted practice to develop.
So just listening to English doesn't actually activate that area.
Exactly.
It's kind of like if you were watching a cooking show, like you said, you have all the ingredients.
Yeah,
It's not going to make you a chef.
right. You actually have to get in the kitchen and start using your hands.
It's an experiment, yeah.
You can watch all the cooking shows you want, but until you actually pick up a knife and start chopping those vegetables, you're not going to develop the skills that you need.
Right.
And it's the same thing with speaking English. You need to actively engage those speech production muscles in your brain.
Okay, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
But there's this other thing, right? It's like this fear of making mistakes or sounding silly or just feeling judged.
Right.
It can be so paralyzing.
Absolutely. Fear is a really powerful force, and it could definitely hold us back from speaking.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is to understand that everyone makes mistakes, even native speakers. No one's perfect. And fluency isn't about, like, achieving some mythical state of flawlessness.
Right. So we're not trying to erase mistakes altogether. 'Cause
Exactly.
that just feels impossible.
It is impossible, and it's much more about shifting your perspective from a fear of making mistakes to embracing the joy of communication.
Okay, I love that.
So think of it like this. When a baby is learning how to walk, how many times do they fall down?
Like a million.
Countless times. But do they just give up and decide they're never going to walk again?
No.
No, they keep getting up and they keep trying, and eventually they master it.
That's such a good analogy.
And they're not afraid of those stumbles. They see them as part of the process.
Yeah, they don't even think about it.
Exactly.
It's just part of learning to walk.
Yeah. And that's the kind of mindset that we need to cultivate when we're learning a language.
I like that.
So embrace those stumbles, those moments where you say the wrong word or you make a grammar mistake. See them as stepping stones or your path to fluency.
I love that.
Yeah, the more you speak, the fewer stumbles you'll have.
Right.
But even when they do happen, you'll be able to just laugh them off and keep going.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about like the brain stuff, we've talked about fear. Now let's get into like some of the actual techniques to
Yeah.
help us get past that fear and get those words flowing.
Yes, one of the techniques that could be incredibly effective, but a lot of people overlook, is simply thinking in English.
Okay.
It might sound obvious, but so many learners get stuck in what we call the translation trap.
Okay, so instead of constantly translating back and forth in our heads, we're trying to like form the thought in English.
Exactly, that's the goal. And the more you can immerse yourself in the language, the easier this becomes.
Okay, so immerse ourselves in the language.
Yeah.
But like, how do we actually do that?
Yeah, so what does that look like in practice? Well, it means more than just passively watching Netflix.
Okay.
Think about it, like you're actively engaging with the language, you're listening to podcasts, but you're listening to them at like 1.5x speed
Oh, wow.
to train your ear, or you're using shadowing techniques
Yeah.
to try and mimic native speakers, or you're watching movies with English subtitles so that you can connect the spoken word with the written form.
Right.
It's about creating an environment where English is constantly seeping into your brain.
Okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see how these things all fit together.
Yeah.
Like, we're training our brain to think in English.
Yes,
We're letting go of that fear of making mistakes.
absolutely.
And we're actively immersing ourselves.
Yes.
What else can we add to our toolbox?
Well, so welcome back to our deep dive into speaking English more confidently. You've been working hard, rewiring your brain, facing those fears head on. It's amazing.
It is.
And now we're going to add another powerful tool to your arsenal, mastering the art of pronunciation.
Ooh, pronunciation. I'll admit that can feel like a bit of a mystery sometimes.
Yes.
Is it really just about, like, getting all those individual sounds right, or is there more to it?
It's easy to get caught up in those individual sounds, right? But pronunciation is so much more than just saying words correctly. It's about rhythm. It's about intonation. It's about the music of the language.
Okay, the music of a language. I like that.
Yeah.
One of the videos mentions something about English being a stress-timed language.
Yes.
I have to confess that went completely over my head.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to explain. So it basically means that we emphasize certain syllables in words and in sentences more than others. And this creates a rhythm that is unique to English.
Okay.
So think of it like a waltz, right? It has a very distinct beat with certain steps that are emphasized more than others. English sentences have a similar flow,
Okay.
with the stressed syllables creating that beat.
So it's not just about pronouncing each word perfectly, it's about understanding, like, where to put the emphasis.
Exactly. And that's what gives English its natural flow. And mastering this rhythm is key to sounding more fluent and more confident.
Okay, but how do we actually practice that? Is it just a matter of, like, listening really carefully?
Listening is essential, of course.
Yeah.
But remember those active learning strategies that we talked about?
Yes.
Things like shadowing?
Mm-hmm.
That could be incredibly helpful for pronunciation because you're not just passively listening, you are actively trying to mimic the sounds and the rhythm of a native speaker.
Okay, so I'm starting to see now how shadowing connects to so many different aspects of speaking.
Right?
It's like this multi-purpose tool for fluency.
Yes, it trains your mouth to move in new ways.
Mm-hmm.
It helps you to internalize those stress patterns. And you even start to pick up on those subtle nuances of intonation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, another technique that came up was recording yourself speaking.
Yes,
But honestly, I find that a little terrifying.
I understand the hesitation,
Yeah.
but think of it as becoming your own pronunciation coach.
Ooh, okay.
So by listening back to yourself, you can identify specific sounds or patterns that you're struggling with, and then you can really focus your practice on those areas.
So it's about becoming more aware of our own pronunciation habits?
Exactly.
Okay. And once we've identified, like, those tricky sounds, those tricky bits,
Yeah.
what do we do?
Well, there are tons of resources out there, things like pronunciation charts, online dictionaries that have audio examples, even apps that can like visually break down the sounds.
Wow.
And don't underestimate the power of just simple repetition.
Repetition.
Yeah.
Sounds a little boring.
It can be tedious, I know.
Yeah.
But repeating those challenging sounds over and over again is how you retrain your muscles to produce them correctly.
So it's like building that muscle memory.
It is.
Okay, I'm starting to feel a little less intimidated by pronunciation now.
Good.
I'm seeing it more as a skill that we can break down and practice.
Yes.
Just like any other part of language learning.
Exactly. And remember, feedback is invaluable.
Okay.
So if you have a language partner or a tutor, ask them to listen specifically for those sounds that you're working on.
Okay.
They can give you targeted guidance and help you to refine your pronunciation even further.
It's like having a personal trainer for your pronunciation muscles.
Exactly.
I like that a lot. Speaking of trainers, I remember one of the videos was talking about the importance of learning, like, those everyday phrases,
Yes.
the building blocks of conversation, like how important those are.
Yeah, mastering those common phrases not only boosts your fluency, but it also gives you this solid foundation for pronunciation. You're internalizing those natural rhythms and intonations that native speakers use without even thinking about it.
Yeah, it's like having a set of go-to moves.
Yeah.
That you can always rely on no matter what the conversation throws your way.
Exactly.
And once you got those down, you can start to, like, build on them.
Yes.
And add in new vocabulary and new grammar structures.
It's a beautiful progression. You're not just memorizing words, you're learning how those words actually fit together in a natural, flowing way.
Yeah.
And that's what makes spoken English sound so well English.
Yeah, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From those tiny pronunciation details to that bigger picture of rhythm and intonation.
Yes.
But before we move on, there's one thing that I want to touch on. It's that prefabricated sentence trap.
Oh, yes.
Like, I know this is something that a lot of learners struggle with.
It's a common misconception that we need to, plan out every sentence in advance before we actually speak.
Yeah.
And while it might feel safer, it can actually hinder fluency.
Okay, so while planning might be helpful for specific situations, like if you're giving a presentation or something,
Yeah,
it's not the key to natural conversation.
exactly. Imagine trying to have a spontaneous conversation while reading from a script. It wouldn't feel very natural, would it?
It would feel so awkward.
Yeah, so how do we break free from this prefabrication mindset and embrace the spontaneity of real conversation?
Yeah. How do we do that?
That's exactly what we're going to explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll delve into those techniques that encourage thinking on your feet, using your existing knowledge to actually create new sentences in real time.
Okay.
It's about unlocking that creativity and letting your personality shine through your spoken English.
Awesome. I am so ready for this. I have a feeling this is where things get really interesting. Okay, so welcome back to the final part of our deep dive, all about speaking English with confidence.
Yes.
We've covered so much already, like rewiring our brains, facing our fears, mastering pronunciation.
Right.
And now it's time for like the grand finale, spontaneous conversation.
Yes, this is where it all comes together. So think of it like you're graduating from those carefully constructed sentences
Mm-hmm.
to creating language on the fly, like a jazz musician improvising a solo.
I love that analogy.
Yeah,
So it's about like moving beyond those prefabricated phrases and trusting ourselves to like create language in the moment.
exactly.
But if we're not planning out every sentence, how do we even begin?
Well, remember those chunks that we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Those aren't just for memorizing like set phrases.
Mhm.
They're the building blocks of spontaneous speech.
Okay, so instead of seeing them as like these rigid blueprints,
Right.
we can think of them more like those Lego bricks that we can combine in endless ways.
Exactly. It's about recognizing patterns and having those ready-to-go chunks of language at your fingertips so you can adapt to whatever comes up in conversation.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So the bigger our vocabulary, the stronger our grasp of grammar, the more we have to work with.
Absolutely. It's like having a wider range of ingredients in your kitchen.
Yeah.
You can create more complex and flavorful dishes.
Totally. But even with all the right ingredients, sometimes I just freeze up in conversations, especially when I'm trying to like formulate a complex thought.
Yeah, and that's totally normal. One thing that I see a lot of learners struggling with is this fear of silence.
Silence.
We tend to think that we need to fill every gap in the conversation with words,
Right.
but pauses are actually a really powerful tool.
Okay, so those moments of silence,
Yes.
they're not a sign that we're failing.
Not at all native speakers use pauses all the time,
Right.
to emphasize a point, to gather their thoughts, or even just to create a little bit of dramatic tension.
Oh, wow.
It's part of what makes spoken language sound so natural and engaging.
I like that. That's such a mindset shift for me. So
Yeah.
instead of like panicking when there's a pause, I can see it as an opportunity to think, to
Exactly.
craft my response.
Yes, and while you're thinking, it's perfectly fine to use those filler words.
Okay.
Like, or like,
Right.
they might not be grammatically perfect,
Right.
but they're a natural part of spoken English, and they buy you time to formulate your thoughts.
So those little filler words, they're not the enemy.
No, they're your friends.
They're our friends. They're just part of like the rhythm of a natural conversation.
Speaking of rhythm, let's talk about another element that can add a lot of flavor to your spoken English idioms and slang.
Ooh, yeah, those colorful expressions, they can be so tricky, but they also make English so much more fun and expressive.
They do. It's like adding spices to your cooking. A little sprinkle can make all the difference.
It can really change the flavor.
And the best way to learn them is through exposure, watching movies, listening to music, even just paying attention to how native speakers use them in everyday conversation.
So it's like building this collection of like secret ingredients that
Oh.
only native speakers know.
Exactly, but I know I've definitely had some embarrassing moments trying to use slang in the wrong context.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Context is key, so some slang is very informal
Right.
and might not be appropriate for every situation.
Yeah, definitely.
So pay attention to how native speakers use these expressions and then gradually start to incorporate them into your own conversations.
So it's like finding that balance between sounding natural, but also using those expressions appropriately.
Exactly, and that's what fluency is all about. It's about expressing yourself, authentically connecting with others, and sharing your unique voice with the world.
Wow, we've reached the end of our deep dive here into the world of spoken English.
We have.
And I have to say, I feel so much more confident
That was great.
and energized, and I feel like we've explored the science, we've tackled those fears, and we've uncovered like a whole toolkit of techniques.
Right.
What's the biggest takeaway you hope our listener walks away with today?
More than anything, I hope you've realized that speaking English fluently is a journey, not a destination. It's about embracing those stumbles, those pauses, those moments of imperfection,
Yes.
and seeing them all as part of the process.
I love that.
The more you speak, the more you develop that confidence and that spontaneity that makes conversation truly fly.
And remember, guys, you don't have to be perfect to be fluent. It's about communicating, connecting, and expressing yourself authentically.
Exactly.
So what are you waiting for? Get out there, start conversations, and watch your English speaking skills soar.
We've given you the tools and the mindset shift. The rest is up to you, so go out there and make it happen.
You ever get that feeling where, like, you can understand so much English, but when you try to speak, it's like,